one night he messaged me and he was like, "Who did you vote for?" And I didn't know how to answer, and I just did the best I could. And he said, "I wish that you told me you had HIV instead of told me you were not progressive anymore."
Interesting. What did you respond with?
Well, I said, I found Coleman Hughes, I found Glenn Lowry, I found all the voices that you're not supposed to hear because they don't fit the narrative. And that really triggered a dissonance. It was, why are these people saying what they're saying? I'm supposed to kind of believe this script, right? You know, the cops kill black Americans at much higher rates. No? Well, no, actually.
Welcome to Psychobabble. I'm your host, Joe Nucci, and today I have the honor of getting to sit down with Anthony Rispo. Anthony is a recent graduate of Columbia University, where he studied psychology, focusing on the theory of mind, political psych, and a lot of really, really interesting topics that I know I personally find fascinating, but a lot of you who are listening also find fascinating as well. He is a writer and a social media content creator, just like me. Anthony, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here myself.
Yeah. So why don't you, for those of us who aren't familiar with your page, I know you haven't been making content very long. Why don't you just tell me and those listening just a little bit about yourself? I'd love to get some context.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think just to start about my page, just to jump right in, it was April 15th, I think, and I was on my way to a class. It was an early class, and I read an article. I found an article about, the state of affairs at Columbia, of course, with the protests and the disturbances and all that stuff. I found a news article about attendance at Columbia dropping and the acceptance rate going up. So that relationship gave me pause, and I just posted something about it, about 38 seconds, saying essentially what it came down to was, this is an impediment on Columbia's reputation, and that was pretty much it. And then for me, relative to my experience with social media, it exploded, as it were. It didn't go quite viral, but viral in my context.
Yeah. And
so I've been wanting to start talking on social media more regularly and to sort of craft some kind of brand, and this just kind of happened, and I thought, well, I think I need to just go with this and keep this momentum going. And sure enough, that's what happened. So I just started thinking real hard, how am I going to really deliver what I'm trying to say, what I want to say? And I sort of battled myself a bit and thought, well, I really do want to talk about the political climate, the division, that I've been wanting to talk about it for years, and sort of the various hypotheses that I've developed over time in terms of political behavior, how that can distill down to the individual level, and then spread outward. And so I just started to go with that and look at some of the studies that I'd become familiar with, and posted another video about a study on the differentials, the left-right differentials, in terms of how the two sides treat each other. And there is an asymmetry. We can talk about that, I'm sure. But it was the asymmetry that really got me going in the first place. And by asymmetry, I'm talking about this idea that, well, people say, oh, it's both sides. Well, not quite. When it comes to certain things, it's not quite both sides. And you find that to be very obvious in the research literature that goes kind of hidden in academia. So that's been altogether my push toward getting on Instagram and talking more about these things. It was just that one day, and then I said I'm going to take it and run with it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. When you say that it went viral kind of relative to you, do you recall how many people or how many views on Instagram did that initial video that inspired you to start posting more?
Yeah, that's a good question. Several thousand. I think, gosh, I don't know. I can't remember. But it definitely, let's see, I actually do have it here. About 91,000 at this point, and almost 3,000 likes and 1,300 comments. So that for me, that just was okay, that I had not experienced that before. So it struck a chord.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say, I remember the first time I went viral, it was, I was posting every day. It was in a lot of ways my intention to do so, but I would say that, my first time doing it, there's a, what am I trying to communicate? I guess I wouldn't necessarily negate the subjectivity of your experience, and get lost too much in the metrics of it, because that is more people than you will meet in a lifetime.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
number that you just listed. And it's a lot of people. And so that's one of the really cool and powerful things about technology, about media, about social media specifically.
Right.
And even though you could look at, someone like I, will hit that benchmark, with a fair amount of frequency, or someone that's, getting hundreds of thousands or millions of views, per post. At the
Right.
end of the day, it's still quite the experience. And so it's not something that I would necessarily, I would diminish for myself, particularly because, you also decided to take it seriously and you decided to run with it. The way the algorithms are designed, I think it's very interesting, is that right now, at least on Instagram, you can have you could be someone with no following at all, but if you make the right kind of video, you can be seen by quite literally millions of people. And it may not necessarily translate to followership. It may not be something you do again, but that's something that's really possible for anyone who's listening if you make a video that's good enough.
It's very true, and you mentioned this before, that certain content, this political content, does very well. I don't know if you said that before we started to record or right at the beginning. I can't remember, but this is true. I've been sort of playing around with that because there are various topics that I enjoy talking about, but the political, the topics that are more condensed around that political culture. Those are the ones that get the most views. There's one that I posted about communism and fascism being a reaction to communism, and that got a little over 1 million view insights. So that's really hitting, and I think because people are seeing that play out in real time, and it's not just something that's happening in the ethers and just sort of in the on social media. They're actually experiencing it on campuses. We're seeing it play out with death cult regimes. I don't know if I can, but it's just a tug of war between this idea of good and evil is so prevalent in our everyday lives, and I think that's the stuff that really hits. And I've also gotten messages from people. I'm sure this has happened to you, thanking you for the content you create and chiming in. And a lot the through line, what I get is thank you for saying what I really would like to say, but don't feel like I can, or thank you for bringing clarity and being calm and composed. And it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know how to live up to that because I'm just starting and I'm not always calm and composed. I mean, that's just, I don't know if you've had to deal with that too, this sort of caricature that's created without your, doing. I don't know.
Right. Well, some people are only going to interact with one random video of yours. Some people are going to see most of them. And so you are not a monolith, or your persona or brand is not.
Right.
And that's something that I think is important for anyone listening, particularly those who are not creating content and putting it out there. It's really important to remember that most of my followers have not seen my most viral posts because they get dumped into the discovery feed. And so it's just kind of a funny distribution tool. And I wouldn't necessarily, I would do my best to not if you do read your comments, to not internalize too much, because that person is interacting with you based on their journey, based on their experience of you. And that experience may be just that one video, right? I'm very curious to know about the, kind of the both sidism of what you were talking about earlier. What initially, I'm curious, before you even started to look into it yourself, was it stuff that was happening on a campus? Did you grow up in a political family? What really drew you to that subject?
To look into the differences between the sides?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to say that, like for many people, 2020 was the impetus. That was really it, that's really when things started for me, when I started to question my priors. I had a lot of cognitive dissonance at that point after George Floyd during the pandemic. Um, so to get to the heart of what really got me into this symmetry or asymmetry issue when it comes to the left and the right, that was really the center. So for instance, throughout all my 20s, I'm 35 now. Throughout all my 20s, I I would say that I was on the left. I certainly was on the left, the progressive left. I mean, just for some context, just for a shorthand and to make it quick, I canvassed for Bernie Sanders. I did calls. I went to rallies and stuff like that. And so I even have videos of myself talking about social issues. I have former posts talking. I get the reminder still on Facebook. It's quite comical. It's really great to see and reflect back on how much you have changed when you have access to that stuff. And so, but in 2020, like for many people, like I said, I experienced a lot of cognitive dissonance around the issues that I'd maintained and believed, and partially because I am a curious person and a psychologically oriented person, and I enjoy research. So I did take to the research and would listen to a few commentators at the time. His Coleman Hughes was kind of one of the first ones. I had my Jordan Peterson kick. I really enjoy Jordan Peterson still, but at that time it was very concentrated. And just had listened to a diversity, a variety of different voices. At the time when we were told to listen to black voices, I did, and I found, John McWhorter, I found Coleman Hughes, I found, Roland Fryer, I found, Glenn Lowry, I found all the voices that you're not supposed to hear because they don't fit the narrative, and that really triggered dissonance. So why are these people saying what they're saying? I'm supposed to kind of believe this script, right? The cops kill black Americans at much higher rates. No? Well, no, actually. And so that just elicited such anxiety, actually. And I had one more fit of kind of anxious, one anxious fit when family members would not put black squares in their Instagram. I remember just really feeling betrayed, and it was after that. It's actually after another moment. Actually, let me fast forward. After that moment, I took part in a campaign to dismantle the Indians mascot at the high school that I attended, and I remember it was students and graduates who had this campaign going on a Google document, and this one guy was leading it, and he graduated from like Johns Hopkins in public health, and he was trying to tell us that indigenous peoples suffer harm from the Indians mask, all this stuff. And then just going into the Google documents, we would draft the letter to the superintendent, and I started to notice there was a lot of infighting and a lot of punitive behavior, a lot of not listening to each other, and it was the letter to the superintendent was particularly snarky and nasty and condemning, and I just felt such at odds with that, and then the black square thing, and then a few other things I won't go into. It's this exhaustive list actually, but I just felt that this is not how to do it. It was very Mean Girls. It was quite narcissistic, actually, self-aggrandizing behavior that has started to notice coalesce around this movement at large. The generally that movement that we all experienced in 2020 thereafter, and then that took me to the psychological literature on victim mentality and vulnerable narcissism, performative. Politics.
So if I could jump in, I have a couple of clarification questions. So the first is, you said you're 35.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so you went to undergraduate a little bit later than most people.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a chunk of my so yes, there's a chunk of my life that I didn't go into, and I didn't.
Yeah.
It might be a little relevant, but just the abbreviated version is, since I was 9 years old, I've been playing classical organ actually. So I've been a
Oh.
musician all my life. That's all I would do, and I was doing up until 2020 when I went back to pursue psychology. So prior to that, I was doing songwriting also, and it actually was a mental health campaign, writing songs about people's stories, and but that kind of fell through when the pandemic hit. Yeah.
And so to get a better understanding of the timeline, the reason I think it's relevant is that it's an unusual perspective to have as an undergraduate on a college campus, let alone a campus like Columbia. I mean, even just if you just want to talk pure biology, your brain is much further developed than a lot of people that are 18, 19, and 20 years old. And so I think that's worth pointing out. And then the second thing that I want to clarify is that, so you started to question the kind of the more dominant progressive or kind of postmodern leftist narratives. Starting in 2020, was it the pandemic? Was it George Floyd? But was it both?
It was both. It was it was the affective response with the George Floyd incident was
your affective response.
Yes.
Yeah.
My affective response, but then after that, which is why I don't want to tangle too many things up, but there's that theory of mind component which comes into play later in the research that I did at Columbia, but that's so the affective response that I had, but then zooming out, sort of having this meta perspective of the general milieu and its affective, collectively, its the affective response on the political left and such, that made me start to feel that something here looks a little disordered. I started to take inventory of the encounters that I'd had over my 20s with myself too, self-reflection, and with others, and just to start to think and backtrack about that interaction, this interaction, how I felt about XYZ, you name it, any fill in the blank with any social issue, of course. Just and thinking about how the gap between a very common quote attributed to Viktor Frankl, the gap between stimulus and response was so tight, and there was no room for perspective taking, no room for nuance, no room for really just curiosity. And I noticed that a lot of the people that I was around when I was very hard on the left, that gap was not really there. It's very binary thinking. And then I started to think about cluster B personality pathology, and how you could see some of these symptoms, at large in the culture that you'd see individually in a person. And I that was 2020, 2021. And I thought, am I the only one thinking like this? Fast forward, and now you have people like J.D. Haltigan, a developmental psychologist. You have tons of other people who are saying the same thing. And that is what really got me interested in the political psychology domain, and then furthermore, the political affective polarization and what undergirds that. Yeah.
Right.
That was the question.
So when you entered Columbia, was that in 2020, 2019?
That was in 2022. 2020, I started when I had to do an associate's for 2 years, and then I transferred to Columbia in 2022.
So you were politically active just in your personal life,
correct,
before going to get your associate's degree and then your bachelor's degree, which you just finished, or you're wrapping up?
I just finished. Yeah. Well, I'm actually just taking one more course as of this recording. I have 2 weeks left.
All right.
But I graduated. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So you have graduated. Okay. And so the timeline is you're politically active, kind of more traditionally leftist, progressive, etc. You started to kind of widen that gap between the stimulus and the response. You started to kind of self-reflect. I don't really like how I'm looking to myself. I don't really like how other people are behaving. I'm also just not even sure, regardless of my judgments of my behavior, their behavior. This doesn't seem to be very strategic.
Right.
This doesn't seem to be very effective. And then you're in school, you end up studying psychology, and you end up getting interested in the literature that was, would you say, is it fair to say that was more seeking to more deeply understand the affective or psychopathological dimensions of political activism, primarily on the left or on the left and right?
That's an excellent question. Yes. Yeah. So yes, that synthesis is beautiful. That's exactly right. And to answer your question, I would say mostly on the left, and it's been that way. And by that I mean looking into the things you just mentioned, the psychopathological structure of the left. And so I think just to fill in one spot that I missed that you alluded to or I alluded to earlier, what kind of got me interested in the left apart from my own experiences, I started to read about the literature and found that there was a right-wing authoritarianism construct and scale, a measure in psychology for almost 70 years at this point. And there's an interesting history to that, that I could briefly, Theodor Adorno left Nazi Germany, it came to the States, and around in the 50s he wrote The Authoritarian Personality, and his aim was to measure what constitutes an authoritarian personality, and it just led him to right-wing extremism, or anything conservative. At the end of the day, the thesis goes conservatism inevitably leads to authoritarianism. And then you had psychologists in the 80s one by the last name of Altemeyer, who made the scale much better, psychometrically better, but no left-wing authoritarianism in sight. No left-wing authoritarianism in sight for anyone to measure or study until 2016. And we get an authoritarian scale for the left. And then you have this pushback.
And who conceptualized that in 2016? Do you recall?
Yes. Last name Costello. And another one, Luke Conway, who I've interviewed and who's an acquaintance friend, sort of like not just someone that I've passed by, but we correspond. He's a really wonderful man. And so that is what really got me interested. It's like, oh, there's something here. There is something here. It's measurable, observable. I'm not just going nuts, and all the things in the scale and in the literature that defines what left-wing authoritarianism is not too different from what right-wing authoritarianism is at the substrate level, at the bottom of it. It's this proclivity to dominate, to crush your opponent, but it's just left and right with an authoritarian bend. So.
But what's kind of fascinating about what you're saying, and maybe it's because I'm not as familiar with the model, but the Adorno's model that you mentioned earlier, this idea that all conservatism necessarily leads to authoritarianism. How were they defining conservatism? Just because I think if you look at conservatism as temperamentally, or I think it's what's his last name? There was this really great writer and theorist who talks about it like the preference to what is known to what is unknown, like the present to the distant. Do you remember this? It's a very famous quote. But it's just so for me, it's like you can think about conservatism as kind of pushing let's say a fundamentalist religious agenda. That makes sense to me in terms of something that could lead that's a slippery slope to authoritarianism. But then the general temperament of federalism or states' rights or individuality or any of those things. And then you also have to ask yourself, well, conservatism in what paradigm? Because what passes for a conservative today, is arguably classically liberal. 50 years ago or whenever Adorno was writing. So was he talking about classical liberalism? Or I guess I'm just kind of curious to understand more deeply what was the merit of the argument? Because it doesn't make sense to me, simplified down.
Yeah, and I think some of it's a temporal difference, based on his assessment, I think because he was a socialist, I don't believe he was part of the Communist Party. Yeah, I think he was more of a socialist. And I'm still actually getting through his work on it. I have to finish reading it. But from what I understand, and don't quote me on this, anybody who's listening, just I think really conventionalism, adherence to tradition, hierarchy, order, these things are parsimoniously, just to kind of give a very quick snapshot, have always been kind of what theorists, I don't say cautious to say always, but it seems even from the time of Rousseau, between Rousseau and Locke, one feels that the society and that the people have a say more broadly than the government, and the other is more limited government, but the government creates a structure. And I think I think Adorno felt that necessarily this particular hierarchical structure format leads inevitably to fascism. So that's a very low resolution snapshot of Adorno's thesis. I mean, I know that that's partially, I would give myself some credit to say that's more than partially true, but there's more nuance to it. And I would implore anyone else who's interested to really go study it for themselves or read his work. But he did lay the foundation for that concept of the right is, leans that way, and it's sort of this inevitability that it will become fascistic. And of course, such is the case with other theorists and academics and scholars who came from the same school of thought, basically said that traditional American values is ipso facto, racist or bigoted, and so that, though, that literature in particular, I'm always careful not to, what's that fallacy, presentism. I'm always careful not to ascribe my personal sensibilities to what they were thinking. Obviously, many of these people were experiencing straight out the gate, truly racism. I mean, in the 60s, these theorists and scholars were writing about something very real. I mean, right after the civil rights movement, it didn't just go away, and same with Adorno and Marcuse and Horkheimer and all these people from the, critical theory schools. And, they had their finger on some pulse, but we're not in that time anymore. And a lot has changed. And I just think that psychology has done a terrible job at updating. And a lot of that is because I would venture to say because, well, academia is very left-leaning, and it's sort of it's a club to some degree and to a large degree, and there's a publication incentive and grants that are a major incentive, and I saw that, and I'm sure you saw that too, and it's sort of like circulating airplane air, or not circulating, it just circulates in the cabin and breathing the same air over and over again, and new ideas are a threat. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about, I read a lot of these names and these theorists at Wesleyan in undergrad. We didn't have minors. I think my alma mater has minors now, but when I went there, we didn't have minors, but we could get certificates. Nice. And so I got a certificate in social, cultural, and critical theory. And so I have read some of these people, and I think it's just kind of funny because I'm very critical of the critical theorists. Yeah, right.
And it's just interesting the general response to my content when I criticize those ideas and they're in today's manifestation or application is often that I don't know what it is that I'm talking about. I've always found that very charming because I think that anyone who has actually seriously read, including some of my very, leftist, I would say socialist, very postmodern progressive professors, they never, took my issues with it and said, well, you just don't know what you're talking about. They would often have thoughtful comebacks, and they would have thoughtful, reasons why, maybe they think I'm straw manning, or maybe they think I'm this or that, or whatever it is, but it was never ever an accusation of well, you just don't know, or you just don't care to know, you uneducated, ignorant buffoon. And I always thought that was so, I always thought it was so interesting. I mean, one of the problems I've had on this show and in my content is it's actually very, very difficult to get people from that intellectual school of thought or from that political ideology or stripe or orientation to talk to me in good faith. They don't want to do it.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, and that's part of the symmetry, the asymmetry question.
Yeah.
And I've started to assemble quite a bit of literature from different areas of psychology to find this, and I found, not to find, because I didn't go in thinking, I'm going to find this paper to find the answer, or this paper. It's just, there is certain effects, certain observations, certain character traits or characteristics that I am interested in, and that's this, things like need for closure, ideological rigidity, and which is gravitate towards that literature, and over time would find the same effect. I'm telling you, the same asymmetry that the left, and it's hard to say this. I struggle. I really struggle saying this because I score really high in agreeableness. I wouldn't say really high. Over time, that score has gone down. But you know, gay dating will do that too. I'm half kidding. I really, it's a mixture of things. But anyway, where was I? Yeah. So I started to notice that there is a certain, I would say certain, but a rigidity, an ideological, I say coagulation, just stiffness on the left that you really don't find on the right that much. And you alluded to this, or you mentioned that it seems like things have just shifted where the right, it's even hard to say that because what is that? That side has become more like, I don't know, 1990s Democrat Party. You know, it's so weird at this point. The party of the working people seems to have shifted in a completely different direction. And I recommend, just parenthetical statement here, I recommend to your listeners to pick up a book called We Have Never Been Woke by a sociologist by the name of Musa Al-Gharbi. And the title, the book isn't what the title sounds like it might elicit in your mind. Like, he's not claiming that we have never been woke per se. He's just bringing us down memory lane to explain to the best of his ability and quite beautifully how these waves of wokeness emerged, what started them. And it's a great sobering read for anyone who really wants to anchor themselves to what's going on, or just to anchor themselves generally. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so the asymmetry.
And so the thesis, the two-liner thesis of the book is that there was that what we might refer to as wokeness was entirely appropriate and needed and just in a certain time period. Or I'm just kind of curious what the implication was for bringing it up.
Well, okay, yeah, just a real quick synopsis. I mean, a lot of it comes down to information economy and something he well, it's not his term, but social capitalist. Is that the term? Symbolic capitalism. Symbolic capitalist. Okay. You have your, sort of highbrow university elites who are not particularly rich, but they create the information, they disseminate the information, they call the shots socially, they identify as liberal, but oftentimes they step on their own feet and create more problems for the people they purport to advocate for. A good visual for people would be, if you know of Columbia University's campus, and I will just frame it real quick. I mean, it's in Morningside Heights in Manhattan, and it's a beautiful area. And you have this gargantuan campus. Gargantuan's a bit of a stretch. There are others that are bigger, but relative to where it is, just relatively speaking, it's a big campus smacked in that middle of that spot. And then right off to the side, you have Harlem that has a very contentious relationship with the school historically. So you have these elites, these, really left-wing elites who are in their beautiful buildings, conducting all this intense research, talking about oppression, you name it, all these social issues. And then you have very little interaction with the people that they write about. And I would say that at the heart of that book, that's what you're going to find a lot of.
Got it.
Yeah, disentangling that. So
yeah,
and that kind of go on. Sorry.
Well, Wesleyan was the same exact way. So was Northwestern. And people were aware of it, and people would talk about it. I wouldn't necessarily say it was central to the discourse, but it was sometimes acknowledged, even if performatively. Although I don't think it's fair to say it always is performative. But people would mention, you'd be talking about economic inequality, and that at the time, I mean, I actually think it's been developed a lot since I've left. But Middletown, Connecticut, was very economically depressed compared to the typical student that
When were you
attended
there?
Wesleyan.
When
I
were
was
you
there from 2012 to 2016 is when I graduated.
Because I've been to that campus and for a summer program when it was a long time ago. That was 2005. But yeah, so I remember the town. But
amazing restaurants, amazing little history, that town. But back to the larger point. So so the book just kind of calls to attention to like it's oversimplifying it, but it's kind of like calling to how high up people can be in their ivory tower, and maybe a little bit disconnected from the social concerns that they purport to care so deeply about.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good bird's eye view, and that is a good segue into the asymmetry I'm talking about, and in terms of the left and the right. And what I was saying before I got off on that tangent was that I was finding a theme that the left, at least today's left, and arguably you see this throughout history when there's a flare up, of social upheaval and economic unrest, and there's such a rigidity on that side, bound by moral absolutism. And this sense of hyper egalitarianism, relational egalitarianism is what it's called, and where you're not only providing goods and like it's not materialistic, it's not material, you're not just, getting more people on welfare and giving people jobs. It's no, you have to, really experience yourself as, say you're a white person, you have to really experience yourself. If you're in the room with black individuals, Latino individuals, you have to really kind of like experience that tension and come and understand how I'm screwing this up a little bit, but it is such an obfuscation of reality. And when you read some of this literature, that it's like, how do I even put this? It's like you're trying to put a circle in a square, and it's so confusing because it demands so much of you in such an abstract way that's so hard to hold on to. And you're just left there flailing, thinking, I guess I just have to like self-flagellate. Implicitly, that's what it feels like. And you just have to experience yourself in a sense that you've caused some harm or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on this. I mean, this kind of discourse is very common at Wesleyan. I was actually a resident advisor for 2 years in a row. So I went through extensive social justice training. I facilitated it at a certain point. Went through it again in graduate school. I actually opted out of a lot of the trainings. I remember I basically either wrote and pleaded my case and said that there was not going to be a value add for me to take this again, or I would and it was, to be totally honest, and I don't even feel bad about doing it, it was a little bit of a fib, but I would say like, oh, like this content is like triggering, like due to like a previous assault that I've had, or like, I just like gave them like reasons, and then they just let me not do it. They never really fought me on it, just because I was like, I'm not going to spend, several hours taking this asynchronous course on like gender. Right. Like I don't like I'm good at this point, right? I need to learn something helpful. But all that to say is that one of the interesting things I found, regardless of the setting that it was in, is I was never clear on what the tangible takeaway was. And you kind of said this, you were like, it's very, very disorienting. And so it seems like is the takeaway for me to just feel guilty or to self-flagellate or to feel shame, you know, for what people of, you know, my identity did, you know, prior to my existence.
Right.
But then sometimes I'm just kind of like, so like, is the point that like, you know, you have to be socialist? Like you just have to be socialist or communist. And that's like the only way to not be a bad person. It's a very nasty moral game. Because I often found that a lot of the students that were playing it the hardest came from unimaginably wealthy families. And so it was just kind of like, okay, like you're like so-and-so's granddaughter or like, you know, whatever, like I'm not gonna like name them because I'm not trying to like embarrass any of them. And so you're wearing a shirt that says fuck capitalism, but like I see where you spend your summer vacations, or like I see who you're going to go work for, like you're working for these huge consulting companies or investment banking companies. And it just felt, I don't know. It was just like, oh, like, well, if you're gonna, I always kind of had the stance of like, well, if like that's the game you're gonna play, then fuck your game. Like I'm gonna go,
totally.
you know, do something else.
Well, exactly. I mean, I slipped it in the what I was saying before about gay dating, and I wasn't. I mean, I said I was half kidding, but I just at some point I decided that I'm done with the litmus tests. I'm just done with them. I'm done with, you know, I want to honor and respect an individual's background and history. And by default, like my default is, it's even hard to say this. Well, more so, it was harder a few years ago. Now it's a bit easier because I feel much better about saying it. But my default is to listen. Like I do like to listen to a person's background, and I care to hear about a person's story, especially if it's in an intimate situation and I want to understand you. But it got to the point where it's like, we're different. You'll never be me. You don't know my story. You won't. It's this just sort of barrage with like these sort of just onslaught of just, you know, you suck essentially. And I recently, I will tell you, okay, I had a recent experience where I was talking to someone and we sort of dropped off a little bit back in November, and then he messaged me again, and this is just about a month or two ago, really, and started talking, and he was like, I really like to talk to you. It was so great to get to know you, also at Columbia, and I won't give too much information away about the person per se, but what happened was astonishing. He messaged and said, you know, sorry I haven't gotten in touch with you for a while, but I'd love to hang out, and it's just, I've been going nuts at Columbia. I'm sure you have too. It's just so toxic here. And, you know, I've had to stop talking to a few people. I was in the encampments, and if you were, then I wasn't in the encampments, and I don't want to upset, you know. So it was just a very frenetic exchange. And I was like, all right, you know, I'll bite, and I'll kind of keep talking. And, so long story short, we didn't touch politics. We talked values, and we talked about our lives and sort of the literature we like to read, the things we enjoy. And it got to that level of what we care about and what we think about, how we think about the world. And, but then it came up, and by it, I mean the political question. And one night he messaged me and he was like, you know, I've been thinking, something's got to be up, you know, who did you vote for? And I'm like, what is your take on this? I'm like, oh my God, you know? And so I basically, what I said to him was, well, for a long time I was on this end of things, and this is how I think about generally, XYZ broadly, you know, about social issues broadly. And I didn't know how to answer, and I just did the best I could. And he just, the ambiguity, just the dealing with that error, that just like expectation that was not met, really made him just crumble. And he said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I wish this weren't the case. And cut most of the story to this point. It was, I wish that you told me you had HIV instead of told me you were not progressive anymore.
Oh, interesting. What did you respond with?
Well, I said, I'm glad that I'm not, but, you know, I don't know why you would say that. I mean, I didn't say that in my head. I did
Well,
at the time. I did, I think, a laugh emoji, and I was like,
yeah.
really? Yeah, I said, really? And I just didn't know what to say, and he kept on saying it, and it was just this
Yeah.
spiral, and then he blocked me. So,
Well,
yeah.
my quick armchair analysis of the
Yeah, yeah.
situation
Love it.
is, that's it's obviously an appalling and offensive thing to say to someone, particularly to another gay man.
Right.
It signals, I think, just a real ignorance, like, of our community's history, or if not an ignorance of it, a willingness to say something that hurtful with the full knowledge of it, which I think almost makes it worse.
To keep
So that's
saying
just
it.
number one. Number two, and this might be more psychology for sport. I don't know how much it applies here. I'm very fond of the literature and the distinctions that look at these moral issues that we've been talking about through the lens of disgust sensitivity. And so it's just fascinating to me. I don't even really know what to make of it, but it's fascinating that he was clearly morally repulsed by you. But then one of the ways he communicated that was essentially like, I wish you had this disease that until very recently was either a death sentence or, really impacted your life. I mean, it's
Right.
for those listening who don't know, the science has made incredible advancements in the treatment of HIV, and it's something you can live with, and live a relatively normal life, assuming you stay on top of your medication. But it's
Right.
it's not something that people then. The stigma is not gone, is what I'm trying to
Right.
say. And so it's just interesting. It was like, I'm morally repulsed by you, but like, to soothe my own maybe cognitive dissonance or my own, kind of twisted up parts of myself, I'm going to let you know that it's like, oh, but I wish you had this, this like lifelong disease that you would have to manage and be lifelong, because, I would be able, because I'm actually still a good person and I would still be with you. I'm educated. I know what it means to be undetectable.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And so it was
Yeah,
kind of
right,
like, for me,
right.
the way it hit me, it was like this weird, like, in a weird way, I would
Right.
say, like, an affirmation that he knows he's being ridiculous, because it doesn't sound like your response was, I'm conservative, I support Donald Trump. It sounds like your response was, I'm still on the left, but I feel very homeless and I don't identify as progressive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, that's right. I mean, well, I definitely have edged more towards the middle now these days, but I don't know how to even say what I am. I mean, but yes, that would be an accurate. That would be accurate. I was. It was just an amazing sort of case study or a case, individual case of, wow, all the stuff that I've been looking into, and has really manifested in front of me, and it has time and time again. But this was just especially strong, and I keep kind of going over the whole asymmetry thing, but I think we're talking through it and everything I've been saying thus far is an effect that you see on the left, more specifically these days, where there's this complete disregard for opening one's mind, or not even disregard, but a aversion to, I should say. And there was a study that was published in 2020, just last year, 2024, right? That showed this effect in a sort of networking model where there were these. I'm not sophisticated enough in this kind of analyses. I have a friend who does data science who's going to help me understand it. But the long and short of it is that they showed that the left right now clusters very tight around specific salient issues, and with those same issues, the right is more expanded, and there's more wiggle room for dissent, for ambiguity. The left right now is so, as I said before, there's a coagulation, and there's such a rigidity that and the study showed that they had to do this vignette of, I think they had to assess a person's political affiliation by reading their, what they marked, how they qualified a certain issue, and they would get it wrong when it was someone on their side who had a little bit of nuance to their perspective. They would say, well, this person's on the right. There's just this closed door. This gap is just airtight right now. And so that's the asymmetry, and it repeats in almost every study that looks at it. The left won't help, the right when it comes to something agentic or something, and the same's not true on the other side. And it's just a very scary effect I say scary because there are people who are really smart and who are personable and who claim to be so affiliative, who are not willing to accept that this is a reality. I even have a hard time saying it out loud because I don't want to believe that one side is kind of worse off right now than the other. I don't like that.
Right.
But it's not really a both sides thing when it comes to certain stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's also tricky in the sense that I'm forgetting the name of the podcaster. It's a fairly big podcast. He's very critical of just American governments, American history, and he's sometimes accused of being just generally anti-American. But one of his main counterpoint to that is he's like, no, like I love this country. And he's like, but because I love it, I'm going to be like, this is like, fucked up about our past or about how we deal with this or like whatever it is. And I think that it's, we need both sides, right? Like we need like the idealism, right, of the left. And we need sometimes, I would say, like, I think the right is more practical in how they kind of go about getting things. It's also why they win so often. I had somebody else on the podcast, and it was funny. She didn't. I think she's very smart. I like her a lot. But basically, the gist of the conversation was she kind of had this like moralistic dig where it's kind of like, well, we didn't riot, and I was like, I was like, that is true, and I'm not taking away from that. But you know what? If Kamala had won, like they would have rioted because they believed she was a communist. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. Like, I don't necessarily think it's that extreme personally, but like that is literally what they believed versus what I saw on the left that I keep coming back to is the first talking point out of their mouth was like, well, notice how we're not rioting, because they would rather, they will. I just feel like the general sense to me is they would rather feel morally superior than win,
Yeah. I think that's a good, I think the right would have organized and have had an event. That I'm being very speculative, but based on sort of the moral foundations and how the right and the left take charge of things, because the left can be so diffuse and so just all over the place and just like sloppy lipstick. It's like that's kind of what I think of. It's like just like all this sloppiness and it just. But yeah, I think that you're right. I think if she'd won the election, that there would have been some kind of retaliation or something of that nature.
Sure.
But
and to be clear, I'm more just pointing to like the congruency on one side, which is like we believe this, and even if you believe that they're brainwashed or crazy or whatever it is, it's like, but that is what they believe, and they're going to conduct themselves like they believe it. Versus, I don't necessarily get the same congruency on the left in multiple domains.
Yeah. Well, actually, sorry. Yes, that's right. Right. And that study I just mentioned kind of helps that empirically. And there are many others where the enclaves of I don't want to say ideology, but of how people congregate around specific issues on the left under the umbrella of social justice, and then you find a lot of infighting and a lot of disagreeableness and a lot of really catty behavior. I mean, they agree on this grand idea of utopia and justice for all in a very different, not Lockean way or founding fathers way. Justice at the expense of, but they can't get it together when it comes to actually getting together. They're so diffuse. There's such a disagreement on who's, like people would say the oppression Olympics. It's like who's more oppressed, and people imbue themselves with the mark of oppression in perpetuity, and it's like this to me is quite pathological. I mean, I really believe that. And you as a clinician, I really am. I know that we don't have a lot of time, but it would be interesting to get your take on that. What you think?
Well, it's I mean, we do have to wrap up soon, but it would be fun to have you back and maybe dedicate an episode to that. Maybe it could even be interesting to get like a panel. Like, it'd be fun to talk to like you to I'm gonna mispronounce his last name, but Halligan.
Haltigan, J.D. Haltigan.
Haltigan.
Have you been in correspondence with him? Or
he's very. I really like how he speaks on the topic. He's very. He's such a scientist. But what I will say is, it's funny because I think that sometimes people, they criticize therapists, and they're like, well, you're not a scientist, and I'm like, I know. I'm fully aware that like what I do is not scientific. Like it's a craft. You apply scientific insights, right? And so to that end, I would say that I think that if the classic definition of a mental disorder is if the dysfunction that you're engaging in is pervasive and you can't help yourself, you can't stop yourself, and it's not leading you to the goals that you value. Right. That is loosely a definition of disordered behavior. And what I see in political activism, particularly in the extremes, I would count the right in this as well. But it does also apply to the left as they continue to go about thinking about things and organizing about things and doing things in a very specific way, and they continue to lose. And one of the more disheartening things after this past election for me was I thought that it would wake more of them up, but it didn't. They've just seemed to have kind of doubled down in their beliefs. And so I think from that stance, there is, for me, there is like the mental health framework and the frameworks of psychopathology certainly seem to apply. I'm very fond, I know we corresponded, I sent you that study that looked at narcissism and psychopathy as predictors for left-wing violence. And what they basically found was, they don't actually care about the issue. They like that they get to be superior or be violent and essentially get rewarded for it. And it's tricky. And I want to make sure that everyone listening here is that I think what's so tricky about that is not me saying that all political violence, or even most of it, right, or feeling morally righteous about your beliefs is you being narcissistic or psychopathic. That is not what I'm saying at all.
No,
right? That's a what do you call it? That's a logical fallacy to interpret that. What I'm saying is that people who are those things are going to gravitate towards your movement, and I haven't seen, except for people in the center or on the right, I haven't seen a single person on the left tackle that issue. And I think that, and I don't actually think that's fully their fault, because I know that when I've made content about that study, for example, the immediate accusation is this is a conservative in liberal clothing. And I am conservative in some ways, but I'm also like incredibly progressive. Like, people forget I live in Manhattan. Like I'm I hang out in Brooklyn. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not that conservative. Like, but it's just, I think it's there's the if I could diagnose it with one thing, I do think that there's like the black and white thinking that you mentioned earlier, and certainly an emotional reactivity or sensitivity that I think they would do well to be systematically desensitized to.
It's like a family system with the narcissistic whatever in it, or the substance abuser who really could just make the whole system miserable, and I think it just takes very few people to do that. And I mean, I agree. I think that's a great point, that it's not all the parts of the whole, but it just takes a few to really make something pathological. And that's I think that's what we're seeing, and that's a good point of clarification for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we do have to stop there. Before we go, how can people find you? I personally really love your content. Like I said earlier, I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scientist, but I love how you're approaching a lot of these issues with that, with emphasizing that lens. And so that's one of the things that got me to follow you, and I really like your content. So how can people come see it? How can they keep up with you?
Well, I want to say I like your content very much too. It's really great, and I'm really excited for what's happening in your life with your book, right? So that's going
Yes.
to be great.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait for that. Um, I'm really active as I can be, as consistent as I can be. Trying to work on that a bit more, but on Instagram, it's just my full name, Anthony Rispo. And I did start a podcast with my friend Clay called the Discourse Lab. We just started that. I think the best way to get in touch with that or to listen to that is through my Instagram. It's very new. So Instagram's a good place to go for now, and that's where you can be updated on really everything that I'm going to be doing in the next few months. Yeah.
All right. And for those who are still listening, make sure to like or subscribe to the Psychobabble podcast and my debut book that Anthony just mentioned. Psychobabble is all about mental health misinformation online and the truths that you need to know behind them. It's available for pre-order now, and coming in September, it'll be available wherever books are sold.